Good evening. Hope y'all have a wonderful year, and it's almost over with. This year's almost closing out, and man, has it been a crazy year. A bunch of people got killed. One person got killed. A bunch of other people got killed. A bunch of famous celebrities passed away this year. Hopefully next year will be better. But anyway, this video I'm doing today, back in 2010, two park rangers was sent to investigate Skinwalker Ranch. If you don't know what Skinwalker Ranch is, or never heard of it, I suggest y'all go ahead and look it up. It's a true place. A lot of weird and creepy shit happens on that ranch and everything. So let's get into the video, shall we? Enjoy it. It's a 50-something minute video. Enjoy.
We arrived at the ranch perimeter on a Tuesday morning in late October. The property stretched across 500 acres of scrubland and shallow ravines, bordered by ridgelines that cut sharp against the sky. The rancher who owned the land had reported 23 cattle missing over 6 weeks, along with signs of predator activity that made no sense. Tracks appeared and vanished without pattern. Carcasses showed up drained with surgical precision that no known animal could achieve. The briefing had been minimal. Our supervisor told us to assess the wildlife situation, document any unusual findings, and determine if the rancher needed federal assistance with predator control. He did not mention the ranch's reputation. He did not tell us about the decades of reported phenomena or the research teams that had investigated before us. We learned those details later, after everything went wrong. My partner had 12 years of experience in wilderness management. He had worked bear attacks in Yellowstone, tracked mountain lions through Colorado backcountry, and handled poaching investigations across 3 states. He approached every situation with methodical professionalism and rarely showed emotion beyond mild annoyance at bureaucratic inefficiency. He was the kind of ranger who followed protocol because protocol worked, not because rules required it. I had 7 years of field experience and a background in wildlife biology. My specialty was predator behavior and population dynamics. I had spent months tracking wolf packs and studying their hunting patterns. I understood how predators moved through territory, how they selected prey, how they left signs that trained observers could read and interpret. Nothing in my education or experience prepared me for what we encountered on Skinwalker Ranch. We set up base camp near the eastern fence line where we had vehicle access and a clear view of the central grazing areas. The location offered tactical advantages. We could observe most of the property from elevated ground while maintaining quick exit routes if weather or other factors required evacuation. My partner pitched the tent while I organized equipment and checked our communications gear. The radio worked perfectly during our initial check. We established contact with the ranger station and confirmed our scheduled check-in times. Our GPS units showed accurate positions with strong satellite signals. The weather forecast predicted clear conditions for the next 5 days. Everything suggested a straightforward investigation that would conclude with recommendations for enhanced predator control measures. We began a systematic grid search of the property following standard wildlife survey protocols. The first section covered approximately 100 acres of open grazing land with sparse vegetation and good visibility. We found tracks from coyotes, evidence of their scat containing rabbit fur and small bone fragments. We documented mountain lion prints near a rocky outcrop that offered ambush positions over game trails. The tracks appeared normal in every measurable way. Size, depth, stride pattern, all matched known species within expected parameters. We photographed each finding and marked GPS coordinates for our report. By midday, we had covered the eastern third of the property and found no evidence supporting the rancher's claims of unusual predator activity. My partner suggested we were dealing with exaggeration or misidentification, but something felt wrong. The sensation was subtle at first, easy to dismiss as fatigue or the psychological weight of working in isolated terrain. The ranch had a presence that I could not explain rationally. The air felt heavier than altitude, and humidity justified. The light had a quality that reminded me of overcast days, even when the sky showed clear blue. The silence became more noticeable as the day progressed. We were in prime habitat for songbirds, grassland species that should have been present in healthy numbers. Yet we heard almost nothing. An occasional raven called from distant ridgelines. A lone hawk circled high overhead. But the constant background chorus of smaller birds that characterizes most wilderness areas was absent. We noted this in our field journals, but assigned no particular significance. Bird populations fluctuate based on food availability, weather patterns, and natural cycles. A temporary decrease in numbers had multiple possible explanations. We continued our survey and completed the eastern section by late afternoon. The sun was still well above the horizon when we returned to camp. We built a fire using deadfall we had collected during our search. The wood was dry and should have burned easily, but the fire resisted our efforts. The flames remained small and gave minimal heat. The smoke rose straight up in the still air without the usual dispersal that wind creates. My partner added more fuel and adjusted the arrangement, but the fire maintained its weak, reluctant burn. We ate freeze-dried meals rehydrated with water from our supplies. The rancher had warned us not to drink from any streams or springs on the property. He claimed the water caused illness, though he could not specify symptoms or mechanism. We followed his advice more from standard precaution than actual concern. Untreated water sources always carried risks regardless of location. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly. The October night brought the kind of cold that penetrates clothing and settles into bones. We added layers and moved closer to the inadequate fire. The stars emerged with unusual clarity, their light sharp and precise against the black sky. I have spent hundreds of nights in wilderness areas and cannot recall seeing stars appear brighter or more numerous. My partner commented on the astronomical display. He pointed out constellations and noted how clearly we could see the Milky Way's structure. His voice sounded normal and relaxed. We were two professionals engaged in routine fieldwork, appreciating natural beauty while maintaining awareness of our surroundings. Nothing in that moment suggested the terror that would begin within hours. The cattle started screaming around midnight. The sound came from the northwest, perhaps half a mile distant based on how the noise carried across open ground. I have heard cattle in distress many times during my career. Predator attacks, difficult births, injuries from accidents, all produce vocalizations that indicate suffering. But this was different. These were not the bellows of injured animals. These were screams of absolute terror. We grabbed our equipment and moved toward the sound at a run. My partner carried his rifle loaded and ready. I had my sidearm drawn and a high-powered flashlight that could illuminate targets at considerable distance. We covered the ground quickly, our boots pounding across the hard-packed earth, our breath coming fast in the cold air. The screaming continued for perhaps 3 minutes. The sound rose and fell, but never stopped completely. Multiple animals were vocalizing simultaneously, their cries overlapping into a chorus of panic. Then silence fell with shocking abruptness. The transition was instantaneous, as if someone had cut audio from a recording. 1 second the air vibrated with cattle terror. The next second held perfect quiet. We reached the northwest pasture and swept our lights across the field. The beams revealed empty grassland. No cattle stood visible within range of our illumination. The fence line showed no breaks or damage. The ground showed normal tracks from cattle movement, but no signs of stampede or struggle. Whatever had caused the screaming had left no obvious traces. My partner moved along the fence while I searched the open field. We worked methodically, covering ground in overlapping patterns that ensured we missed nothing. The grass showed no disturbance beyond ordinary grazing. We found no blood, no hair, no scattered equipment that might have spooked the herd. The absence of evidence was itself disturbing. Then my partner called out. His voice carried tension that I had never heard from him before. I turned and saw him standing frozen, his flashlight aimed at the tree line beyond the fence. I moved to his position and followed the direction of his light. 2 points of luminescence hung in the darkness approximately 6 feet above ground level. They reflected our flashlight beams with yellow-orange intensity. The lights were clearly eyes. They possessed the distinctive quality of biological reflection, the eye shine produced when light bounces off the tapetum lucidum layer behind retinas. But the color was wrong for known species in this area. Mountain lion eyes reflect green or amber. Coyote eyes glow yellow-green. Deer eyes shine white or pale yellow. These eyes show deep orange touched with red, a color I had never seen in wildlife. More disturbing than color was positioning. The eyes sat too high for any quadruped predator. They were spaced too far apart, suggesting a skull wider than any known carnivore in North America, and they held completely still despite our lights fixed directly on them. Animals typically blink or turn away when caught in bright illumination. These eyes remained motionless, staring back with apparent unconcern. My partner raised his rifle and centered the sights on the position between the eyes. His finger moved to the trigger guard, ready but not committed. We had authorization to eliminate predators that posed immediate threats, but protocol required positive identification before lethal action. We could not shoot at unknown targets based solely on eyeshine and position. I moved laterally to get a different angle. My flashlight beam swept across the trees, trying to illuminate the body that must be attached to those eyes. The light revealed bark and branches and shadows, but no animal form. The eyes tracked my movement, rotating to maintain their stare. Then they blinked. A slow vertical closure that took a full second from top to bottom. When the blink completed, the eyes were gone, not concealed by movement or terrain, but simply absent. My light hit the same position and found only trees. My partner swept his beam across the area. We advanced to the fence line and searched the ground beyond. Nothing. No tracks. No disturbed vegetation. No heat signature on the thermal scope we carried for night observation. We stood at that fence for nearly an hour, scanning the darkness with every tool we possessed. We found no further signs of the eyes or whatever had produced them. The night remained absolutely silent. No insects buzzed, no small mammals rustled through grass, no owls called from the trees. The absence of sound pressed against my eardrums like physical pressure. Eventually we returned to camp. Neither of us spoke during the walk back. What could we say? We had both seen the same thing. We both knew it matched nothing in our combined 19 years of field experience. Discussing it would not provide explanations or comfort. We needed rest and daylight to reassess what we had witnessed. My partner rebuilt the fire using most of our remaining fuel. The flames remained weak but provided some psychological comfort. He sat with his rifle across his knees and stared into the darkness beyond our small circle of light. I checked my sidearm 3 times, a nervous habit that provided no practical benefit. We took turns sleeping in 2-hour shifts, one person always awake and watching. Dawn brought no relief from the oppressive atmosphere. The sun rose clear and bright, painting the landscape in sharp detail. But the silence persisted. The absence of ordinary sounds that should accompany morning in wilderness areas felt more noticeable in daylight. No birds sang. No insects emerged with rising warmth. Even the wind seemed reluctant to blow across this property. We ate a cold breakfast and discussed our options. My partner wanted to contact our supervisor and request additional personnel or permission to withdraw. I argued we needed more evidence before escalating the situation. We had seen unusual eyes and heard distressed cattle. These observations warranted continued investigation rather than abandoning our assignment after one night. We compromised by agreeing to survey the western sections we had not yet covered. If we found evidence supporting extraordinary claims, we would contact headquarters immediately. If we found nothing, we would complete our scheduled 5-day assessment and report through normal channels. It was a reasonable plan that balanced caution with professional duty. The western terrain was rougher than the eastern sections. Ravines cut through the landscape at irregular intervals, creating pockets of shadow even in full sunlight. Juniper stands grew thicker here, offering concealment and limiting visibility. The ground showed more rock exposure and less soil coverage. Navigation required more attention to avoid twisted ankles or falls. We found the first drained carcass in a shallow gully about 2 miles from camp. The discovery came without warning. We descended into the gully to follow a game trail and nearly stepped on the body before noticing it. A cow lay on its side in a depression that suggested it had collapsed where it stood. The position appeared natural, as if the animal had simply lain down and died. But closer inspection revealed profound abnormalities. The body showed no visible wounds, no bite marks, no tears in the hide, no broken bones visible through the skin. Yet the entire carcass had collapsed against its skeleton. The hide lay directly against bones with no intervening tissue. Every internal organ, all muscle mass, every drop of fluid had somehow been removed. I knelt beside the carcass and examined it thoroughly. The hide felt like leather that had been tanned and dried, completely desiccated despite lying in open air where moisture should have been present. I pressed my hand against the rib cage and felt individual ribs through skin that should have been separated from bone by inches of muscle and fat. The entire cow had been reduced to hide stretched over skeleton. My partner photographed the carcass from multiple angles while I searched for tracks. The ground around the body showed prints from the cow itself, indicating it had walked to this location. But there were no other tracks, no predator prints, no drag marks, no signs of struggle. The surrounding dirt looked completely undisturbed except for the depression where the body lay. I examined the cow's hooves and legs for defensive wounds. Animals under predator attack typically show signs of fighting or attempting to flee. Scratches, breaks, damaged hooves from running over rough terrain. These marks tell the story of an animal's final moments. This cow showed nothing. Its hooves were intact. Its legs showed no injuries. It had apparently died without resistance or awareness of threat. The lack of decomposition smell was equally disturbing. A cow this size should have been producing significant odor if death had occurred more than a day prior. The high desert climate might slow decomposition compared to humid environments, but some bacterial activity should have been evident. Yet the carcass smelled of nothing except the faint leather scent of dried hide. We marked the GPS coordinates and continued our search. Over the next 3 hours, we found 6 more carcasses in similar condition. All showed the same pattern: total internal extraction, no visible wounds, no tracks except those of the cattle themselves. The distribution suggested either multiple simultaneous attacks or a single predator moving through the herd with methodical efficiency. My partner's professional demeanor began to crack. He had seen predation in every form during his career: bear attacks that left partially consumed carcasses, mountain lion kills with characteristic neck wounds, coyote packs that worked together to bring down larger prey. But this bore no resemblance to known predator behavior. This suggested something operating according to rules that exceeded our understanding of biology. We stopped for lunch on a ridge that offered views across the western sections. The sky had remained clear throughout the morning, but the quality of light still felt wrong. Everything appeared slightly overexposed, as if the sun were brighter than it should be for this latitude and season. My partner mentioned this observation while eating his meal. He sounded relieved to discuss anything besides the drained carcasses. That was when we found the humanoid prints. They appeared in soft dirt at the bottom of a dry wash that we descended to continue our survey. The impressions were fresh, probably made within the past 24 hours based on their crisp edges and lack of wind erosion. They showed clearly defined details that allowed precise measurement and documentation. The prints measured 14 inches from heel to longest toe. The width at the ball was approximately 6 inches. 5 distinct toe marks showed at the front, each ending in what appeared to be claw indentations that penetrated half an inch into the soil. The overall shape was humanoid, suggesting a foot structure similar to human anatomy, but scaled to massive proportions. I photographed the prints with a ruler for scale and took measurements with a tape measure. My partner cast several impressions using dental stone from our evidence kit. The process required 20 minutes and gave us excellent detailed replicas that would serve as permanent documentation. While the stone hardened, we followed the trail of prints along the wash bottom. The stride length measured over 6 feet between consecutive prints. That spacing indicated an entity well over 7 feet tall, assuming normal proportions between height and gait. But more disturbing was the gait pattern itself. The prints showed perfect alignment, one foot placed directly in front of the other in a line that suggested bipedal movement with extraordinary balance and coordination. The trail led up the ravine wall at an angle that should have required hands for climbing, yet we found only foot impressions pressed deep into the slope. Whatever had made these prints possessed leg strength, capable of propelling significant mass up near vertical terrain using feet alone. No ape or primate species in North America match these capabilities. At the top of the ravine, the prints turned south and crossed an area of exposed rock. We lost the trail where hard stone provided no medium for tracks. We searched the surrounding area for another hour but found no continuation. Whatever had made these prints had either changed direction on the rock or had somehow concealed its passage across terrain that should have shown some sign of its weight and movement. We stood on that ridge and reassessed our situation. The evidence had moved beyond unusual into extraordinary. Drained cattle with no wounds, massive humanoid prints showing impossible climbing ability, eyes that reflected light in colors unknown to regional wildlife. The cumulative weight of these observations demanded explanation that conventional predator behavior could not provide. My partner attempted to contact our supervisor via radio. He tried multiple frequencies and got nothing but static corrupted transmissions that rendered communication impossible. We checked our GPS units and found them functioning perfectly, showing our exact position with satellite accuracy. The failure was specific to radio transmission, suggesting either equipment malfunction or interference from unknown sources. The sense of being watched intensified as afternoon shadows lengthened. The feeling was distinct and persistent, that certainty of eyes tracking your position from concealment. Every ranger develops this instinct through years of field work. You learn to recognize when predators observe you, when other humans are nearby but hidden, when circumstances require heightened alertness. This felt different in degree, but not in kind. We decided to return to camp and attempt radio contact from there. If communication remained impossible, we would drive to the ranger station and report in person. The decision felt like retreat, like admitting defeat in the face of phenomena we should have been equipped to handle. But professional pride mattered less than accurately documenting what we had discovered and ensuring proper response. The walk back took longer than it should have. Landmarks we had noted during our outbound journey seemed displaced. Ravines appeared in locations where we had crossed flat ground hours earlier. The sun position indicated we were heading east toward camp, but the terrain felt unfamiliar. After an hour of increasing confusion and concern, we stopped to verify our position using GPS. The GPS showed we had covered less than half the distance we should have traveled based on our pace and time elapsed. We had somehow walked in patterns that covered ground without making progress toward our destination. The revelation was disturbing on multiple levels. We were experienced wilderness travelers who rarely lost orientation, yet something about this property disrupted our natural navigation sense. That was when the whistles began. The first came from behind us, a long, clear note that sounded almost musical. The pitch was pure and sustained, definitely not produced by wind through rocks or branches. Then a second whistle answered from our left, slightly lower in pitch. A third came from ahead, completing what felt like a triangle of positions around us. The whistles were communication. That interpretation came immediately and instinctively. These were not random sounds, but signals exchanged between intelligent sources. The pattern suggested coordination and intent. Something was tracking our position and reporting our movements to others of its kind. We were being hunted by entities capable of complex cooperative behavior. My partner and I moved closer together, without discussing the action. We both understood that proximity offered marginal protection through combined situational awareness. He chambered around in his rifle with careful deliberation. The metallic click sounded impossibly loud in the silence that followed the whistles. I drew my sidearm and checked that a round sat ready in the chamber. Movement flickered at the edge of my vision. I turned my head quickly but saw nothing. The movement came again on my other side, too fast to track, gone before I could focus. My partner experienced the same phenomenon. His head swiveled constantly, trying to catch whatever moved just beyond clear perception. We stood back to back and scanned our surroundings while afternoon light faded toward evening. The sun descended toward the horizon with agonizing slowness. We needed darkness less than we needed to reach camp. but darkness was coming whether we wanted it or not. I considered our options and found them severely limited. We could continue toward camp and hope to reach it before full dark. We could dig in at our current position and wait for dawn. We could attempt to retreat to the property boundary and evacuate entirely. Before we could implement any plan, the first clear sighting occurred. A figure emerged from behind a stand of juniper approximately 50 yards away. It moved with fluid grace that seemed wrong for something so large. The body stood perhaps 7.5 feet tall, humanoid in basic structure, but distinctly other in proportions and movement. Dark hair or fur covered most of the visible surface. The head appeared too large for the frame, with a skull that suggested massive jaw musculature. The eyes caught the failing light with that same yellow-orange glow we had seen the previous night. The arms hung long, reaching past where knees would be on a human. The legs showed powerful musculature visible even through the covering of hair. This was a creature built for running and climbing, with capabilities that exceeded human athletic potential. This was a skinwalker. The identification came with absolute certainty despite my previous skepticism regarding such entities. I had heard descriptions from Navajo consultants during earlier assignments. They spoke of shapeshifters, beings that could take animal or human form, creatures that practiced dark magic and hunted those who trespassed on their territory. I had dismissed these accounts as cultural mythology, not meant to be interpreted literally. But mythology did not explain the physical presence now watching us from across broken ground. This was flesh and bone, muscle and sinew, a biological entity that existed in the same physical space we occupied. Whatever explanations applied to skinwalkers, whether they represented unknown species or something that exceeded current scientific understanding, this one was real and present and potentially hostile. My partner raised his rifle and centered the sights on the skinwalker's chest. His breathing had gone rapid and shallow. His hands shook slightly despite his extensive firearms, training and combat experience. The situation had moved beyond anything our preparation had addressed. We were wildlife management professionals confronting something that might not be wildlife at all. Before he could fire, 2 more skinwalkers appeared on our flanks. They materialized from terrain that should not have concealed anything that large. One emerged from a depression that looked too shallow for concealment. The other seemed to simply appear beside a rock formation, barely large enough to hide a normal-sized human. They had positioned themselves with tactical precision, creating a triangle that covered our possible escape routes. We were surrounded. The realization hit with cold clarity that threatened to break through professional detachment into raw panic. 3 skinwalkers had us bracketed in a formation that suggested military-level coordination. They were working together with clear communication and shared tactical understanding. We faced not animals but intelligent hunters who had assessed our capabilities and planned accordingly. The central skinwalker took 3 slow steps forward. Each movement was deliberate and measured, testing our response. I could see facial details now in the fading light. The features were elongated, not quite human, not quite any known animal. The nose and mouth region protruded further than human faces. The eyes sat wide apart in deep sockets. The overall effect suggested something that shared distant ancestry with humans, but had diverged into different evolutionary trajectory. The hands riveted my attention. They looked almost human in basic structure, with opposable thumbs and 5 digits, but the fingers were too long and ended in dark claws that curved slightly. These were hands capable of manipulation but also adapted for combat and climbing. The combination of traits suggested intelligence paired with physical capabilities that far exceeded human limitations. Then it spoke. The vocalization was not speech in any conventional sense, but rather a series of clicks, whistles, and guttural sounds that formed clear patterns. The other 2 skinwalkers responded with their own vocalizations, creating a conversation we could hear but not understand. They were discussing us, making decisions about how to handle our presence in their territory. I made a decision based on instinct rather than training. I lowered my sidearm slowly, keeping the movement obvious and non-threatening. My hand trembled as I holstered the weapon. My partner glanced at me with an expression mixing disbelief and question. Then he followed my lead, lowering his rifle but not slinging it, maintaining readiness while signaling reduced threat. The skinwalkers watched this action with visible interest. The central one tilted its head in a gesture that seemed almost curious. It took another step forward, closing the distance to perhaps 40 yards. At this range, I could see the rise and fall of its chest with breathing. I could see the muscles flexing under its fur with each small movement. This was definitely a living creature, not hallucination or misidentification. For perhaps 30 seconds, we stood frozen in that tableau. 3 skinwalkers at measured distances, 2 rangers with lowered but accessible weapons, the dying light painting everything in shades of orange and purple. The moment stretched with tension that felt nearly physical. Every muscle in my body was taut and ready for action that might prove futile against opponents with superior numbers and physical capabilities. Then the central skinwalker made a gesture with one elongated hand. The movement was clear and deliberate, a sweeping motion that could only be interpreted as dismissal or permission. It was telling us to leave, granting safe passage through territory we had entered without authorization. The gesture conveyed intelligence and agency that exceeded simple animal behavior by orders of magnitude. The skinwalker melted back into the landscape with impossible silence. One moment it stood clearly visible. The next moment it had vanished into shadows and terrain features that should not have provided adequate concealment. The other 2 skinwalkers disappeared within seconds, using the same inexplicable ability to fade from sight despite their size, and our continued observation of their positions. My partner and I did not speak. We moved immediately in what we hoped was the direction of camp, walking quickly but not running, maintaining awareness of our surroundings while fighting the urge to bolt. Running would trigger chase instincts in most predators. We needed to appear controlled and purposeful despite the terror that threatened to overwhelm rational thought. The terrain began to make sense again. We recognized landmarks and found trails we had used earlier. Within 20 minutes, we saw our tent and the cold remains of our morning fire. The relief was so intense it nearly brought me to my knees. We had made it back. The skinwalkers had allowed us to reach safety rather than pursuing and eliminating us. We packed our equipment with shaking hands. Neither of us suggested staying another night. The investigation was over. We had seen enough to file reports that would trigger responses far above our authority level. Remaining on the property served no purpose beyond exposing ourselves to additional danger. We loaded the truck with frantic efficiency, stuffing gear into cases and bags without the usual careful organization. The sun had fully set by the time we finished loading. We drove out using headlights and GPS navigation, not trusting our sense of direction after the disorientation we had experienced. The property boundary came into view with its fence line and gate marking the transition to ordinary land. We passed through that gate and immediately felt the oppressive atmosphere lift. We did not stop until we reached the ranger station 40 miles away. My supervisor was still at his desk despite the late hour. We filed a verbal report of our findings, describing the drained cattle, the unusual tracks, and the encounters with what we termed unknown biological entities. We did not mention skinwalkers specifically. The term carried too much cultural baggage and would invite skepticism that might undermine our credibility. The supervisor listened without interruption, his expression growing more concerned as we talked. When we finished, he made a phone call to someone higher up the chain of command. The conversation was brief and heavy with coded language that suggested this was not the first such report he had received. He hung up and instructed us to write nothing down, discuss our findings with no one, and report to a different office the following morning for debriefing. That debriefing lasted 6 hours. We were questioned separately by people who did not identify their agency or rank. They wore civilian clothes but carried themselves with military bearing. Their questions were detailed and specific, focusing particularly on our encounters with the entities we had described. They showed us photographs of tracks and asked us to confirm matches with what we had seen. The photographs were identical to our findings. They produced additional documentation showing similar reports from other teams who had investigated the ranch over decades. Rangers, researchers, military personnel, all had encountered phenomena that defied conventional explanation. The pattern was clear and consistent. Whatever inhabited Skinwalker Ranch was real, persistent, and had been documented extensively by official sources who chose to maintain classification rather than public disclosure. At the end of the interview, we were required to sign non-disclosure agreements with language that was comprehensive and threatening. We were informed that discussing our experiences outside authorized channels would result in immediate termination, loss of pension benefits, and potential criminal prosecution under various national security statutes. Our photographs and notes were confiscated. Our GPS data was downloaded and erased from our devices. Our plaster casts of the prints were taken as evidence. We were reassigned to different districts within a week. My partner transferred to a desk position handling permit applications and public education programs. He left the service entirely 6 months later and now works in private security. He refuses to discuss Skinwalker Ranch or anything related to our experience there. The investigation broke something in him that could not be repaired. I stayed in fieldwork but avoided any cases involving Skinwalker Ranch or similar locations. The experience had fundamentally altered my understanding of reality. I had spent years believing that natural world operated according to understood principles, that unknown species might exist but would ultimately fit within established biological frameworks. The Skinwalkers challenged those assumptions at every level. Years later, through informal channels and off-record conversations, I learned we were not the first rangers sent to investigate the ranch. Multiple teams had been dispatched over decades, all encountering similar phenomena, all filing reports that were immediately classified. The pattern suggested either a persistent anomaly or an ongoing monitoring operation designed to document rather than resolve the situation. What I know with absolute certainty is that skinwalkers exist. They are not folklore, not misidentified animals, not psychological phenomena. They are physical entities that occupy the same space we do, but operate according to rules we do not understand. They display intelligence and coordination that suggests complex social structure. They are territorial, and they possess capabilities that exceed human physical limitations by significant margins. The ranch itself appears to serve as their territory, or perhaps their hunting ground. The property boundaries seem to mark limits they respect, or that somehow contain them. In all the reports I later accessed through unofficial channels, no encounters occurred outside the ranch perimeter. Whatever keeps them there, whether natural boundaries or something else, has held for as long as documented history of the property exists. I think about that encounter constantly. I replay the moment when the central skinwalker dismissed us, when it made the deliberate choice to let us leave rather than attack. That decision proves capability for restraint and judgment. It demonstrates that these creatures assess threat levels and make strategic choices rather than acting on pure predatory instinct. They think, they evaluate, they decide. Those abilities place them far above any known animal species in cognitive function. The question that haunts me is not whether skinwalkers are real. I have seen them with my own eyes at close range in good light. The question is what they want and what other locations might harbor similar entities. If Skinwalker Ranch is not unique, if these creatures exist in other isolated territories across North America or beyond, then our understanding of the world is fundamentally incomplete. We share the planet with intelligent species we have not acknowledged. The official position remains that Skinwalker Ranch experiences unusual but ultimately explainable phenomena. Ranchers lose cattle to ordinary predators. Rangers and researchers mistake weather conditions and shadows for something more sinister. The classified reports and systematic cover-up of evidence are justified as protecting public safety and preventing panic that would serve no constructive purpose. But I was there. I saw the drained cattle with their hides collapsed against skeleton. I measured the massive humanoid prints that showed impossible stride and climbing ability. I stood within 50 yards of 3 skinwalkers and watched them communicate in complex vocalizations. I saw the intelligence behind their eyes and felt the weight of their assessment as they decided whether to kill us or let us go. Those experiences cannot be explained away by rational skepticism or dismissed as misidentification. My training was extensive and my professional experience was substantial. I am not prone to panic or hallucination. What happened on Skinwalker Ranch was real and physical and absolutely outside the bounds of accepted biology and natural history. The skinwalkers exist. That is established fact for anyone who has encountered them directly. My partner never recovered his equilibrium after our investigation. He told me once, years after we had both moved on to different work, that he still heard the whistles in his dreams.